Why do we sometimes say we want peace, but when peace begins to come, we do not quite know what to do with it? That is not a simple question, but it is a very real one. Because many of us spend years praying for relief, for stability, for healthier relationships, for less chaos, for more order in our lives. And then something strange happens. The conflict eases, the pace slows down, the crisis passes, the toxic relationship ends, the house becomes quieter, the pressure lowers, and instead of feeling deeply settled, we feel restless, agitated, flat, almost suspicious. And that raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the problem is not only that chaos has been around us? What if chaos has also gotten inside us? What if part of what we now call normal has been shaped by years of stress, unpredictability, emotional intensity, and survival? Because if that is true, then peace will not always feel peaceful at first. Sometimes peace feels empty. Sometimes peace feels boring. Sometimes peace feels exposed. Sometimes peace feels like something must be wrong. And that is what we need to look at carefully, because we do not merely move through chaos unchanged. Over time, we can adapt to it. Our minds, our bodies, our habits, even our relationships can begin to organize themselves around urgency. We get good at reacting, managing, fixing, rescuing, enduring. We become competent inside disorder. And over time, we may even start confusing intensity with meaning. So when peace comes, it does not immediately feel like home. It feels unfamiliar. That is the hidden pattern. And once we see it, a great deal begins to make sense. Why we sometimes recreate crisis in relationships, why we can feel uneasy when things are finally calm, why we procrastinate until everything becomes urgent, why rest can make us feel guilty, why stability can make us uncomfortable, why silence can feel louder than noise, why healthy love can sometimes feel less compelling than unhealthy drama. This is not because we consciously want destruction. Usually we do not. It is because the nervous system learns through repetition, and what is repeated starts to feel normal, even when it is harming us. We can become familiar with criticism, familiar with unpredictability, familiar with walking on eggshells, familiar with overfunctioning, familiar with being the strong one, familiar with never resting, familiar with earning affection through usefulness, familiar with living in reaction rather than intention. And then when God begins to lead us toward peace, we do not always receive it with immediate joy. Sometimes we may even resist it, not because peace is bad, but because peace requires a different self than the one chaos trained. Now the Bible understands this far better than we often realize. Think about the story of Israel in the Old Testament. The Israelites have been enslaved in Egypt for generations. That matters. Not only because slavery was cruel, though it was, not only because they were oppressed, though they were, it matters because an entire people had been shaped inside domination, fear, and forced labor. Their days were controlled by Pharaoh. Their existence was organized by survival. They were not living freely before God. They were living under a system of pressure. Then God acts. He raises up Moses, confronts Pharaoh, sends plagues against Egypt, and finally leads Israel out through the Red Sea. This is one of the central deliverance stories in Scripture. God rescues them dramatically, publicly, unmistakably. He breaks the power that held them. But then something surprising happens in the wilderness. They keep looking back toward Egypt. And that is astonishing if we stop and think about it. Egypt was the place of bondage. Egypt was where their children were endangered. Egypt was where their labor was exploited. Egypt was where they cried out for deliverance. And yet, in the wilderness, when freedom becomes difficult and uncertain, they begin speaking as if slavery had a kind of comfort to it. Why? Because bondage had become familiar. The wilderness was free, but it was also unstable. It required trust. It required dependence on God one day at a time. There were no old structures to lean on, no predictable routines of captivity. Freedom was better, but it was also unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity can feel frightening even when it is holy. That is a profound insight into us. We do not only need liberation from what has oppressed us, we often need retraining after liberation. Our desires, our reflexes, our imagination all have to be reshaped. We have to learn how to live free, and many of us know what that feels like. A destructive season ends, but we do not immediately become peaceful people. We are no longer in Egypt, but Egypt is still in us. The relationship may be over, but the anxiety pattern remains. The job may have changed, but the frantic identity remains. The family system may have lost its power, but the internal voice remains. The house may be calmer, but the soul still expects emotional weather. That is why peace can feel so strange. Now consider another Old Testament figure, Elijah. Elijah is a prophet living during a time of deep corruption in Israel. He confronts false prophets, stands against wicked rulers, and lives under immense pressure. In one dramatic scene on Mount Carmel, he calls down fire from heaven in a public confrontation that proves the God of Israel is the true God. It is one of the most intense moments in Scripture. High stakes, public conflict, massive spiritual pressure. And immediately after that great victory, Elijah collapses. He flees into the wilderness. He becomes overwhelmed. He asks to die. He is exhausted, disoriented, and afraid. This matters because it shows us something we often need to hear. We can be courageous, effective, and spiritually serious and still have our inner life damaged by prolonged intensity. God does not respond to Elijah's collapse with contempt. He lets him sleep. He feeds him. He cares for his body. Then later, when Elijah stands on the mountain, God is not found in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in what many translations call a low whisper or still small voice. That is deeply meaningful. Elijah has been living in public drama, confrontation, and pressure. But God reorients him not through more spectacle, but through quiet. And this is where we often struggle. We say we want God, but sometimes we are tuned only to intensity. We begin to assume that the real things must be loud, that meaningful life must be dramatic, that love must be emotionally charged, that productivity must be frantic. But God is not only present in the fire, He is also present in the whisper. And if our souls have been trained by chaos, the whisper can feel like absence at first. Not because God is absent, but because we have not yet learned how to hear peace. Now move into the New Testament and look at the life of Jesus. One of the most striking things about Jesus is how unhurried he is. Not passive, not indifferent, not disconnected, but unhurried. He is available without being frantic. He is purposeful without being panicked. He responds to need, but he is not driven by the need to appear urgent at all times. And this matters because Jesus lived in a world of real suffering, real interruption, real demand. People were sick, desperate, grieving, oppressed, confused. Crowds pressed in on him constantly. And yet his life is marked by order. He withdraws to pray. He sleeps in a boat during a storm. He stops for individuals. He asks questions. He refuses to be controlled by every expectation around him. That is not weakness. That is integrated strength. It is what a life looks like when it is governed by communion with the Father rather than addiction to urgency. And many of us find that hard even to imagine. Because somewhere inside, we believe that if we stop moving, stop fixing, stop anticipating, stop carrying everything, then everything will fall apart. But that belief is often the scar left by chaos. It is not always the truth. Jesus also says in John 14, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you." Notice that carefully. The peace Jesus gives is not merely improved circumstances. It is not the world's version of peace, which often means comfort, control, convenience, or the absence of disruption. It is a deeper kind of order, a steadiness of soul anchored in God. Peace is not pretending life is easy. It is not becoming emotionally numb. It is becoming rooted enough in God that chaos does not have the final word in us. But to receive that peace, we often have to let go of identities we've built in chaos. Because peace asks, who are we when we are not rescuing everyone? Who are we when there is no crisis to organize ourselves around? Who are we when we are not proving our worth through stress? Who are we when life gets quiet enough for grief, emptiness, or unresolved pain to finally be heard? That is why we can sabotage peace, because peace removes distractions, and when distractions are gone, we may have to face ourselves. Now, think about the story in Luke 8 where Jesus calms the storm. Jesus and the disciples get into a boat. A storm comes down on the lake. The boat begins filling with water. The disciples panic because they believe they are about to die, and Jesus is asleep. They wake him in terror. He rebukes the wind and the waves, and then there is calm. That story is not merely about weather. It is about trust, perception, and inner condition. The disciples interpret the storm as ultimate. Jesus does not. And many of us live as if every storm is ultimate. Every interruption, every conflict, every uncertainty, every emotional disturbance. But Jesus reveals another way of being present inside instability. Not detached, but governed. Not pretending danger is unreal, but refusing to let fear become Lord. And perhaps one reason peace feels unfamiliar is that chaos has taught us to worship control. It has taught us to believe that safety comes only from constant scanning, constant managing, constant tightening. But the peace of Christ teaches another truth. We are not held together by our vigilance alone. Now let us bring this down to ordinary life. We may have been in relationships where affection and tension were mixed together, where love was inconsistent, where people were close but not safe. And then, years later, genuine kindness can feel strangely flat to us, not because it is lacking, but because our souls learn to associate love with volatility. We may have spent years being the fixer in our families, the dependable one, the practical one, the one who absorbs stress. And then when life becomes more stable, we can become irritable and restless because calm forces us to confront the possibility that we do not know how to live except in reaction. We may come out of long seasons of strain and find that, even when things are objectively better, part of us still lives as if disaster is one day away. We cannot rest, we cannot enjoy, we cannot trust provision. Our bodies may be in a safer season, while our minds are still in the old one. This is what it means for chaos to remain in us after the situation changes. So what do? First, we stop assuming that discomfort with peace means peace is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is simply withdrawal from chaos. Sometimes it is evidence that our inner world is adjusting to a healthier pattern. Second, we tell the truth about what chaos gave us. Not only what it cost us, but what it gave us. Did it give us identity? Did it give us a role? Did it make us feel important? Did it keep us distracted from grief? Did it spare us from stillness? We cannot release what we are still secretly using. Third, we learn that peace is often a practice before it becomes a feeling. We may need to sit in quiet prayer before it feels natural. We may need to keep healthy boundaries before they feel comfortable. We may need to rest while part of us feels guilty. We may need to remain in stable relationships long enough for our nervous systems to stop calling stability boring. Fourth, we let Scripture retrain our imagination. We read the Gospels and notice the pace of Jesus. We read the Psalms and notice how often refuge, shelter, stillness, and waiting on God are treated as strength, not weakness. We read Israel's wilderness story and notice how easily human hearts can prefer familiar bondage to unfamiliar freedom. And fifth, we do not build our lives around urgency when we can build them around faithfulness. Urgency can make us feel needed. Faithfulness makes us whole. Those are not the same thing. And one more thing must be said. Peace is not passivity. Breaking free from chaos does not mean becoming disengaged, irresponsible, or emotionally shut down. Peace is active. It tells the truth. It sets limits. It acts with courage. It serves with clarity. It suffers when necessary. But it does not need disorder to feel alive. That is the difference. So let me leave you with this. Maybe we have been asking God for peace, but now that some measure of peace is appearing, we feel strangely unsettled. Maybe part of us is tempted to return to old patterns simply because they feel familiar. We should not misread that moment. It does not necessarily mean we were made for chaos. It may mean we are still learning freedom. Israel had to learn freedom. Elijah had to hear God in quiet. The disciples had to learn that Christ was Lord even in the storm. And we have to learn that peace is not emptiness. It is what happens when God begins to reorder a life that chaos once trained. So stay in the quiet a little longer. Do not run back to noise just because you recognize it. Do not call stable things lifeless because they are not dramatic. Do not confuse adrenaline with purpose. Do not confuse tension with love. Do not confuse exhaustion with faithfulness. Let God teach our souls a new normal. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not only that God gets us out of chaos, it is that over time, He gets chaos out of us.